Shalom, shalom. My name is Andrew Hodkinson, and every Friday at 6 p.m. Jerusalem time, I put out a short teaching to root people in a breadth of topics related to keeping Torah from the heart, representing the Commonwealth of Israel, and to trust ultimately in the righteousness of God that's been revealed through our precious Messiah, Yeshua. This week, we are going to look at a puzzling and intriguing passage, a prophecy that comes from the prophet Zechariah in the 11th chapter, where the prophet takes up the role of a shepherd. And why this passage is so compelling for understanding is because I would imagine that within the broad body of Messiah, his covenant people Israel, this is a disjointed prophecy that many look at, and it just lacks a cohesive, overarching view to understand it. So Zechariah, he begins with living out the role of the good shepherd. And he appears to shepherd two flocks with two different staffs. The one is called favor and the other one called unity. And the first flock is the flock that's described as marked for slaughter, and it's connected to the staff called favor. And then there is the poor of the flock who appear to be connected to the staff called unity. The first flock marked for slaughter, the good shepherd feeds for a while, but then he takes his hands off, as Amos would allude to. The capitalism of the shepherds would lead to selling their own flesh and blood, selling them out for money. And the good shepherd at some point, he's had enough and releases the sheep marked for slaughter to their fateful end. So we read of this in Zechariah 11:9-11. Then said I will not feed you. That dies, let it die. And that is to be cut off, let it be cut off. And let the rest eat every one the flesh of another. And I took my staff, even favor, and cut it asunder, that I might break my covenant, which I had made with all the peoples. And it was broken in that day. And so the poor of the flock that watched me knew that it was the word of Yehovah. So it's here that the other flock, called the poor or afflicted of the flock, they understood the removing of favor from the sheep marked for slaughter, as they looked upon the new reality of the destruction put on those other sheep. And it's here that the surviving flock, with regards to the surviving flock that we read, and I said unto them, if you think good, give me my price, and if not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver, and Yehovah said unto me, cast it unto the potter, a goodly price that I was prized at by them. And I took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of Jehovah. Now, even my 11-year-old would want to make some gospel connections here with, and you most likely are, and hopefully are thinking about what I'm thinking, the incident with Judas. And herein lies the mystery and the curiosity, because for most believers, this statement just comes out of nowhere, straight out of left field, with no ability to root it in what came before. Then Zechariah, as living out the good shepherd, he takes the stick called union and he breaks it, and then we are given a phrase clearly linked to the historical story of Jacob's children. Zechariah 11, then I cut asunder mine other staff, even unity, that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. This is about the nation of Judah, which is associated with Jacob's tribes of Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, and the house of Israel associated with the other 10-tribe nation that was forsaken of God into Assyria. Again, what's going on? And it's at this point that Zechariah wraps up the prophecy in take up the instruments of the foolish shepherd, and the judgment on this one warrants some attention because, well, it's quite severe. He goes on to say, "For lo, I will raise up a shepherd in the land, which shall not visit those that be cut off, neither shall seek the young one, nor heal that is broken, nor feed that standeth still. But he shall eat the flesh of the fat, and tear their claws in pieces. Woe to the worthless shepherd that leaves the flock. The sword shall be upon his arm, and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened." So I hope that you are intrigued. It begins with a parable about of shepherding, and then it goes to a prophecy about Judah's betrayal of Yeshua for 30 pieces of silver. It then goes back to the ancient Israelite story of Judah and Israel, and then foolish shepherds not caring for the sheep. And so for many, this is just a mishmash of certain ideas. You could ask your average rabbi, your average priest, teacher of the Bible, and the answer you'll most likely get is a metaphorical idea of good and bad shepherds with a random 30 silver coins and temple potter motif, and then kind of going to the ancient brotherhood feud between Judah and Israel. So, calling all shepherds here, let's be honest, we don't really know what to do with this. And maybe it's because our figurative arms and right eyes have been darkened by not understanding the flock of God. So, who is the one that is described right there as being cut off? Who is the young one spoken of? Who was Messiah talking about when he said, "I have come for the lost sheep of the house of Israel"? In humility, as a voice, I know I'm just a voice crying out in the wilderness. Please, I ask that we try and understand the one we know as the Good Shepherd, and what story would lead to him in the first century saying in John 10, "As the Father knows me, even so I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also I must bring in, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd." Let us pray for the grace of God to help us connect something that is really not connecting concerning the Good Shepherd. Let's read Ezekiel 37. Here we have a couple of verses here again, which we must somehow tie together. "And I will make them one nation in the land upon the mountains of Israel, and one king shall be king to them all. And they shall be no more two nations, neither shall they be divided into two kingdoms anymore. And David my servant shall be king over them. And they all shall have one shepherd, and they shall also walk in my judgments and observe my statutes and do them." And one part of the shepherd's flock, by the end of that sentence there, will need to stop calling this idea of judgments and statutes as legalism, and we should start, we will see in that day, we will begin to see the commandments as obedience. And if we're ever to, have a non-fractured understanding of Zechariah 11, we need to understand that it's really crying out for an interpretation through the doctrine of the two houses of Israel. And I know, as I say this, there will be Jews and Christians who will go to, this is replacement theology, this is supersessionism, this is British Israelism, this is Jewish wannabeism, whatever cultish term you want to smear onto what is a most obvious doctrine of Scripture. So if you don't want to hear about the two flocks of Messiah's Israel, you can move on. This is for shepherds who are open, and as Bereans will go and just say, let's hear this out. And here are the 6 core beliefs, which I don't have time to get into a defense of each, but I really believe is the reality concerning the people of God at this time. Okay, number 1, Messiah made the covenants with Jacob's nation. a lot of scriptures I can give here. Look them up to really understand the one who was establishing covenants with Israel from the beginning. The second point is just to understand Judah's nation will never dominate Joseph's nation, and Joseph's nation will never dominate Judah's nation. They will always be two independent dominances within each other, but are called to become one and work alongside each other. Number 3 is that Judah is represented by the Jewish nation and their diaspora. Joseph was historically understood as the 10 tribes that assimilated into the world since roughly 722 BC. Point 4, the Jews remained in covenant with Messiah because of his mercy on them. Joseph, however, was divorced from the Son of God because he did not have mercy on them. Joseph, also called Ephraim, was divorced and sown into the nations so that all nations may partake in the covenants of Jacob's God. And then finally, at the cross, Joseph, Ephraim, became a broader term, now multiplied in greatness, as representing a commonwealth of nations, of literal descendants of Joseph and adopted children of Israel in covenant alongside the Jewish nation. I have other teachings on this if you root around my channel. But with this understanding, we see how Zechariah 11 can make sense. It begins establishing point number 4, the flock marked for slaughter are those on whom God had no mercy. It's most likely speaking of Joseph, Ephraim. This is reinforced by the judgment brought against these as described as coming from Lebanon and Bashan up in the north. This is, because this kingdom was bordered by those nations. And how interesting that Zechariah goes on to say that their slaughtered covenant status, divorce, was that God may, or in other words, he created the possibility to break the covenant with the peoples. The Hebrew word there is amim, a word related to goyim, Gentiles. So this would point to, I believe, belief number 6, the rejection of the flock would lead to a change in covenant status for all peoples when the Good Shepherd died on the cross. And this gives some chronology, gives some flow to Zechariah 11 to see how this moves to the whole 30 shekels that the Jewish leadership spent to get rid of their Messiah, their shepherd. We know the leaders, rather than seeing in the plan of God that through Jacob's rejected seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed, the Jews enjoyed their sole holy people covenant status since Joseph was divorced from God and had the same covenant status as Gentiles. The Jewish leaders liked the status quo that exists before the cross, where John would describe in particular the feasts and the holy mountain, Jerusalem, in a sense as technically, it's for the Jews. These things were for the covenant people, described by Pharaoh as the firstborn of nations. And this wasn't bigotry. The scriptures testify that the Goyim were dogs to the Jewish nation in terms of their exclusive covenant. And this was the pre-cross reality. The issue is that the leaders in particular, they did not have the heart of the Good Shepherd, who was there in human flesh. And the 30 shekels, I think we can really link to Yeshua's coming and testifying to the leaders of Jerusalem, going into the temple and just saying, no, this shall be a house of prayer for all peoples. Amen. When we get that from Isaiah. And clearly they didn't take this well, because they knew Yeshua was quoting from Isaiah 56, and that this was a reference to foreigners keeping God's Sabbaths and having the ability to take a hold of the holy nation's covenant, and that as the prophet saw, even these Goyim, their sacrifices would be accepted on Jehovah's altar. This was not received with joy. The Jewish leadership took this vision like a child getting the news that mum and dad are considering to adopt a strange son into the family. So really, Zechariah 11, I believe, begins to show us an understanding of point 5, and that through the slaughtered flock, there could be achieved a breaking of the second-class covenant status with the peoples. And for some, this would be a joy for the Jews, and in particular their leadership. This was a case of thanks, but no thanks. And this makes a plausible reason behind Jewish motivation for paying the price to relieve the Good Shepherd of his active ministry with them. John 11, they gathered the chief priests and the Pharisees, a council, and said, "What do we? For this man does many miracles. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him." And this could have been the broader vision. You know? "And the Romans shall come and take away both our place and nation. And one of them, named Caiaphas, being the high priest that same year, said unto them, You know nothing at all, nor consider that it is expedient for us that one man should die for the people, and that the whole nation perish not. And this spake he not of himself, but being high priest that year, he prophesied that Yeshua should die for that nation, and not for that nation only, but that also he should gather together in one the children of God that were outcasts abroad. Then from that day forth, they took counsel together to put him to death. Yeshua therefore walked no more openly among the Jews, but went thence unto a country near to the wilderness, into a city called Ephraim, a prophetic act, and there continued with his disciples, and the Jews' Passover was nigh at hand. I would say the last technically Jewish Passover. But hence, we really must not think that the two flocks are not connected to the 30 shekels of silver. But let's get into that huge indictment of Judas taking the money of betrayal, which the leaders priced the Good Shepherd at, and the symbolism of God orchestrating out of their control that Judas would throw this back into the temple. Back to those leaders, and it being described as money for the potter, and the leaders admitting that it was blood money. As Paul said, had the Jewish leadership known, they would never have killed the Lord of glory. And yes, the very one whom Isaiah saw as the image of the invisible God, whose voice caused the posts of the temple to shake, most likely connected to King Uzziah's earthquake. Do not separate the Malach HaBerit, the Malach Yehovah, the theophany person of God in ancient Israel, who they longed to return to his temple. Don't separate him from the voice of the one that cried out on the cross. And according to early Christian tradition and Hebrew gospel manuscripts, caused the temple to be shaken and the lintels being broken, or a lintel, causing the veil in the temple to be torn. Yes, the money that would be used to buy the potter's field. But just as Jeremiah showed us, Israel's God in his triune complexity is the great potter. He can make a pot and choose to have it smashed, and another to be raised up as an ornament to behold. He lifts up some for noble purposes, and then he slaughters some sheep with no mercy into covenant destruction. And this goes to point number one, that Messiah, the shepherd, he humbles and exalts according to his plans. As God said concerning the glory person who he would reveal to Moses in Exodus 34, he is gracious on whom he will be gracious, and he will have mercy on whom he will have mercy. So, sorry Christians, but not sorry. If he is chosen to still be in covenant despite being paid off with 30 shekels, the Talmud saying, we rejected him as a guide and he deserved 50 fiery lashes, I think it was, for not standing in the presence of God. If he maintains covenant, then we need to get it in our heads. He is in covenant. And if there's one thing to learn, unfaithfulness on one partner's side does not necessarily mean rejection from the other. And the last time I read it in Isaiah, it says, he is a stumbling block to both houses of Israel. So we have to get this because Paul, when he says branches were cut off because of unbelief, that Greek word is unfaithfulness. And I know in the minds of the flock that Messiah has gone to bring into covenant, we think this is about speaking about, the house of Judah, the Jewish nation, he is cut off. No, the Jews weren't cut off from covenant. For the nations, John 10 is very clear in this regard. The mechanism for bringing in the other flock from all nations was not a process that removed those whom he chose to remain in covenant with and continues to be in covenant with. So yes, blindness came, no doubt, but it had to be this way in order for the Jewish people to kill him for our benefit. And here comes the sad reality of Jewish rejection of the shepherd for us. Zechariah 11 speaks of Jewish betrayal leading to the breaking of the staff called unity or union, where we're told that the good shepherd, through his death, it would also fundamentally break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. And the relationship between the two was to be badly affected. And it was historically bad, but even worse now, as it would be fulfilled through the Jewish nation and the commonwealth flock of Israel after the cross. And so this was prophesied in Psalm 118 under the Spirit. The psalmist would say, the stone which the builders refused has become the headstone of the corner. This is Jehovah's doing. It is marvelous in our eyes. This is the day which Jehovah has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. So yes, Jewish leaders, they chose their people's fate. But like Joseph in Egypt, can we maybe not just see that what some meant for evil, Elohim has meant for good, to save many lives, to draw many near to him. And the cost has not been an easy one for the Jewish nation. I take the opinion that the execution of Yeshua is one of the most dramatic events in the Jewish psyche. Even a liberal Jew, it's kind of like you can worship any God, but just don't go there. Don't mention JC, don't talk about Yoshki. It is the deepest Jewish commitment, I think, of the last 2,000 years. Greatest Jewish tradition of all time. It's their hill, national hill that they will die on. That the one they sold out for 30 shekels of silver, used to buy the potter's field, this was not Mashiach, the Son of the living God. Herein we have an understanding of how the brotherhood is irreparable unless the shepherd, he returns in his love and in his mercy and makes himself known across the board. The spiritual hostility is really baked into this current situation. Even though Messiah would say that he lays down his life for the sheep, and despite scriptures saying this is the day of Yehovah's doing, this is the day that he has made, there's this natural feeling of wanting to blame. For the nations that love the covenant and the shepherd and his goodness towards us, is this underlying frustration of Jewish dismissal of the one who's been so good to us. The end of the prophecy is one of warning to all shepherds across the spectrum of covenants. And I would just say, learn who was cut off, understand why, get some nuance into how we are to understand God's people. And, so bind up, those that need to be bound up, have mercy where we should have mercy. Be gracious as our Lord has been gracious to us. And I hope that people will see that Messiah he is in covenant with an Israel that is a nation and a company of nations. And that there is blindness all around, but his grace is calling those nations of the covenants to come near to the holy mountain, not Rome, not Constantinople, and to keep the Sabbaths. that are described as for the sons of Israel. You are adopted. However, don't think you're Jewish. Don't undermine what's point number 2. Let us all know His grace will ultimately work out how He chooses to work it out with the Jewish nation and according to His timing. Time is going to tell how this plays out, but Zechariah 11 needs to stop being this fragmented picture. And I think it's sometimes because shepherds want to take sides of either Jewish superiority or the Commonwealth of Israel. We need to respect Messiah, respect His people, respect their roles, and respect that degree to which He has allowed some to draw near to the God of heaven. And I hope through Messiah's grace there may be a bit more light concerning what Zechariah was speaking of here. Let's not be shepherds who stumble over the chief cornerstone. Love His flock, all of it, and pray that more and more nations may be drawn near to the knowledge of Jacob's God, Father, Son, and Spirit. Many blessings to you. I hope this may help you understand more about this intriguing prophecy that Zechariah gave us. Shalom.